I would say it's not entirely surprising for two reasons. Number one, the Duterte administration itself had kind of, by the end of the 6 years, had kind of started backing away from that sort of pivot to China. They'd cancelled the plan to cancel the US's visiting forces agreement. And Duterte had started to make fairly regular statements in public forums, including in the UN General Assembly, about the Philippines' rights in the South China Sea. So it came from a backdrop where the Philippines' policy was kind of moving in that direction. The other sort of indicator was that Bongbong Marcos on the campaign trail had actually early on in some interviews had used some Duterte-like rhetoric about the South China Sea arbitration case being a piece of paper or not available to us, I think were Marcos's words. But by May, after he'd been elected, he was repeatedly stating that he's not going to cede 1 inch of Philippine maritime territory and promising to assert the Philippines' rights under the arbitration. So with that as the backdrop, I wouldn't consider it particularly surprising that we've seen Marcos pursuing the closer ties with the US.
Yeah, because even under Duterte, when they tried to court China, it didn't necessarily serve their purpose very well. And we have seen China really pushing the boundaries, haven't we, in terms of some of these disputed territories?
That's right. But I think China pushing the boundaries of China's position in the disputed territories forward, in other words, advancing its claims assertively over these expanses of disputed maritime space, is really nothing new. This is something that my own research has gotten into over the years. It's a long-term push from China, and it happens at a micro-granular level. But that it inevitably results in frictions and tensions, and that we've seen that pretty consistently over the journey, particularly since 2007. It's been going on for about 15 years now.
Yeah. The recent laser incident where China allegedly shone laser lights at some of the Philippines Coast Guard. Do you think that is going to be the more provocative kind of action we're going to see from China?
I think that particular area where the laser incident occurred is likely to be a flashpoint in the future. The context for what happened was that this was a resupply mission from the Philippines to their outpost on Second Thomas Shoal, where they have a number of Marines on a grounded vessel. And China has been maintaining a constant Coast Guard presence there since 2013, 2014, and interfering periodically with the resupply missions. And that Philippines outpost on Second Thomas Shoal is essentially crumbling into the sea. It's a rusty old ship. And eventually they're going to need to reinforce it. And China has previously said that this will be crossing some kind of line. That's when they've started to take actions to interfere before, is when they say they've spotted some kind of construction materials on board the Philippine resupply missions. So inevitably, this is going to probably happen more and more over the next few years until that situation is resolved. As for the specifics of the laser incident, the Philippines, multiple agencies from the Philippines government have said that a Coast Guard staff personnel was temporarily blinded by this green laser that was shone from one of those looming Chinese Coast Guard ships near the Philippines outpost. China sort of tried to downplay the incident, as it often does, by saying that this was a necessary speed check and saying that it was a matter of responsible maritime navigation. But this is definitely the kind of thing that I would expect to see more and more in that particular area over the next few years.
Yeah, really interesting. And to stop that Philippine build-up, what role do you see Australia playing potentially in this region?
Well, Australia is a close partner of the Philippines. It's the only other country with the same kind of military arrangements as the United States has inside the Philippines, albeit not with a formal treaty alliance. And we have seen in recent times Australian and Philippine officials flagging the long touted potential for joint patrols in the South China Sea. Australia already sends ships into the South China Sea periodically, and also aircraft. There's the Royal Australian Air Force flies regular missions out of the Butterworth base in Borneo around the South China Sea inside China's 9-dash line claim. So in a sense, that is that kind of freedom of navigation patrol happening already. But what we saw recently was the defense minister flagging that they're working on potential maritime patrols involving ships jointly in the area. And I haven't seen it happen between Australia and another regional country before. So that will be interesting if it goes ahead.
Yeah, very interesting. Andrew, many Filipinos are quite angry at how Marcos is rewriting his family's legacy. What are you expecting from his leadership style?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not a particular expert on Philippines' domestic politics, but taking the China angle on it, certainly when Marcos made his first state visit to China in January, there was a lot of talk of the family legacy, and Xi Jinping made a series of remarks about how friendly Marcos Sr. had been to China and how beneficial the relations had been under his dictatorial rule back in the 70s and 80s. So on the China front, I think Marcos will likely be kind of trying to use that legacy to derive what benefits he can from China, at the same time as he pursues this, fairly clear move to strengthen ties with the United States.
Yeah, back to that traditional ally. Great to have you on, Andrew. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.